Well, welcome. My name is Amanda Opitz. I'm the communications coordinator here at the Y, and I have the great honor of introducing our speaker today, Lisa Parks. Dr. Parks is a professor of film and media studies and the director of the Center for Information Technology and Society, as well as an affiliate of the Feminist Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She earned her bachelor's degree in political science and history here at the University of Montana, and completed her doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Her research focuses on media technologies in relation to social justice issues and political activism throughout the world. And she has published 5 academic books and over 100 academic articles in the field of media and communication studies, and has delivered lectures in more than 20 countries. So, woof, that's quite a resume. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Parks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And I also want to say thank you to my mother, Marilyn Lamayich, who volunteers here at the Y and elsewhere as well. Thanks to Amanda, and also to the YWCA staff and all the volunteer community at YWCA. I have to say that I've given a lot of lectures, but it's a real honor to give a lecture in an organization whose motto is eliminating racism and empowering women. I just want to say thank you to that theme. I think it's just really important to just state those words out loud in our society. So today what I wanted to do is give a little bit of an overview of some of the things that I've been working on during the past few years. It's a project in rural Zambia. It's a research project that involves partnering with local people in a rural community called Macha. And I'm going to end up at the end of the lecture. This is for those of you that might want to slide that way, this is going to be a presentation that's very much based on the slides and images. So I encourage anybody that wants to head that way. I'm going to be talking a little bit toward the end of the lecture about some of the field work that we have been doing in conjunction with members of the community of Macha, Zambia. Before I get into that, I wanted to just sort of set up some broader context for thinking about issues of information technologies and their use in Africa. And as we move into the presentation, I'd like you to be thinking about 2 questions for yourself. The first, how have computers and mobile phones changed your life? And then the second question that I think is going to be really important as we get into, and it might be they haven't, maybe you've opted out. The second one, what would it be like to use these technologies if you had no regular access to electricity? For instance, you couldn't just plug in your phone and recharge it. You could not plug in a computer. What would it be like to try to use those technologies if you didn't have access to electricity? The other thing is, what would it be like to use those if your main concern every day was ensuring that your family had running water and you didn't have running water in your home? Okay? So I'm going to be moving toward that set of conditions in the lecture today. But before I do get in there, I just want to lay out a little bit of background here. The first is, when I use the term ICTs throughout the lecture today, I'm referring to information and communication technologies. ICT is our short word for that. And this includes everything such as internet, computers, mobile phones, tablets, smartphones, PDAs, those are personal digital assistants. That kind of ensemble of technologies is referred to as ICTs. And whenever we talk about ICTs, we're not just talking about going down to Best Buy or Verizon or Charter and purchasing something. I want you to be thinking about all of the requirements that are needed to sustain those technologies. So they require funding. They also require huge amounts of energy resources, okay? So in order to operate a mobile phone, you need electricity. You need that battery to be charged. The computer needs to be charged. The TV set needs to be charged. They also require network infrastructures. Those big systems of laying telephone poles across the country in the 19th century, that didn't happen overnight. that required huge investment in capital and in labor and in allocation of land resources that would allow us to have such a thing as these massive network infrastructures so that signals could move across those vast territories. It also includes things like regulation. We have in our country the Federal Commission of Communication, which regulates and sets policies for the use of mobile phone, broadcast technologies, computers, and so on. We have to have access to consumer electronics and even things like literacy. I'm going to get into later situations where when we sit down now in the United States, most of us at a computer, we know what a keyboard is and what it's used for. We know what a mouse looks like and what it's used for, or a touchpad. We were working with people in Zambia who had never seen a keyboard, who didn't know what a mouse was. So how could they be expected to use those machines when they didn't know how the basic components of the machines worked? Okay, so these are some of the background issues that I want you to be thinking about as well as we move through this. And also just this idea that I'm not alone in this. There are researchers across a vast array of disciplines, from media and communications to sociology, women's studies, anthropology, political science, a whole host of researchers who are exploring the use of ICTs in relation to economic disparities in the world, in relation to governance and how we set up our governmental systems, and in relation to culture, how we tell stories, how we perpetuate our languages and our life ways using digital technology. So those are some of the things that researchers are looking at. In terms of the outline of the talk today, and I've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to ask that we hold questions for the end, although if you do have a burning question, just put your hand up and we'll go for it. I'm going to start off with a general overview of talking about ICTs and development in Africa to give you a little bit of context. Then I will go into some of briefly I will discuss the challenges and barriers to ICT integration in Africa. So using mobile phones and computers in Africa, there are a lot of challenges to that. And then I'll talk in more depth about the specific case study in Macha, Zambia, and share some of the field work we've been doing there over the past 2-3 years. So to begin then, I have some slides, and I apologize if you can't see everything. I'll read these out loud so that those of you that can't see it will be able to have the information. There is what people refer to as a global digital divide, which means that people in Africa are disadvantaged relative to access to ICT technologies and networks. So internet users in Africa in 2012 made up only 7% of the world's total use of the internet, even though the population, I don't have the exact number, but the population is way more than 7%. So thinking about the rest of the world uses 93%, all the internet users are in 93% of the world, and Africa makes up 7%. Another slide here shows computers per 100 people, and you can see here in Africa the gray signifies there's no data available. The yellow is 0 to 4.5 computers per 100 people. So you can see that there's very few computers. Not only are there few internet users in Africa, few computers available with which to use the internet. So there's a lot of these kinds of this information available online for those of you that want to follow up further. In 2012, there were over 167 million internet users in Africa, over a total population of 1 billion people, okay? By 2013, there were more than 650 million mobile phone subscribers in Africa. So what we're seeing, and this is not just limited to Africa, even in South America, other parts of what's known as the Global South, the mobile phone is now the most popular technology. It's the technology of choice for a variety of reasons. Anybody want to speculate why? Why would you use a mobile phone as opposed to a computer?
They're cheap.
They're cheap. What else? They're handheld, you can carry it with you, and they're mobile, right? You don't have, it's not a cumbersome thing you got to plop down on a desk and find an outlet. Anything else?
There's no phone lines.
Okay, there's no, in many parts of Africa, there is no landline infrastructure. So if you had a landline phone, good luck using it. Mobile telephony infrastructure has been implemented in Africa throughout the past 5 to 10 years. It's not everywhere, but saturation is getting good, is getting much better. The other thing is that it's a lot easier to use if you are illiterate. In other words, if you have not been trained how to type and read and write English, you have an interface that you intuitively can try to learn to touch on or use your keypad. A lot of them use feature phones, the basic phones, instead of the smartphones that many of us use in the US now. So there are a variety of reasons that the mobile phone has leapfrogged the computer in Africa. This is another chart that just shows mobile phone penetration by country, and the yellow is less than 40% of penetration by country. But down in the southern part of Africa, South Africa, and the countries around it, they have above 100% penetration, which means that many people have more than one mobile phone. Okay? So mobile telephony, when you're going to talk about ICTs in Africa, it's almost like you kind of set the computer aside and you think, okay, how can we get mobile phone applications useful in Africa? Because not as many people are using computers there. Now, economist Jeffrey Sachs has said, he's made this quote, and it gets quoted a lot by people. He says, mobile telephony is the, quote, single most transformative technology for development. And when we use this word development, we're talking about kind of modernization or upgrades in sectors like economics and finance, healthcare, education, and even culture. He says phones compensate. He sees these technologies as compensating for inadequate infrastructure such as bad roads, slow postal services, allowing information to move more freely, making markets more efficient, unleashing entrepreneurship. So he sees this machine, this little thing that people can hold in their hands, as opening a gateway for a kind of vast development and modernization of, underprivileged countries and peoples in Africa and South America, other parts of the global South. Now, I think, this is a provocative statement, and when we think about that, we need to ask ourselves, is this technological hype? Is his comment just selling more cell phones and putting more money in the pockets of the big mobile phone conglomerates? Or is there also some truth and reality to it? So I encourage you to kind of assess for in your own mind whether you think these machines have that much power to transform, our social relations, our economy, our government system. That's something that's up for the people to decide and determine. I tend to be a little bit more of a skeptic on these kinds of proclamations because I think they're loaded with a kind of technologically determinist logic that suggests that these things are going to save our lives, not us. I think people save their lives, not machines that just sit here on a table. So we need to think of a more dynamic way of thinking about that. Scholars have looked at this question and said, well, there are many benefits to the mobile phone. Some of the benefits are incremental. Mobile phones improve the speed and efficiency of what people are already doing. Some of their benefits are transformational. The mobile phone can introduce something completely new to people that they haven't encountered or seen or experienced before. And then finally, some have said that their benefits are productive, that these things actually result in new kinds of economic practices and cultural practices. For instance, they result in a whole peripheral economy, an informal economy of selling these little cases and, little covers and what's called talk time. You scratch off cards that you buy time in Africa instead of having a pre-subscribed service. So those are some things to talk about. Now, quickly, what I want to do is go through and talk about, just to put a little more context on this and make it a little more concrete for you, some of the areas of ICT fostered development in Africa and go through a few quick examples. I want to say I'm sorry if I go through this quickly because they all deserve more attention and time, but I just want to do this to give you a sense of what you might want to be thinking about if you're interested in further following up on these issues. So they've been used in these areas. This is a woman in Nigeria who is a farmer. She cultivates watermelons, and she's out in an area on her mobile phone basically trying to talk to people to sell these watermelons. So she uses the phone to coordinate the logistics of getting the watermelons to market, figuring out who's going to show up and purchase them, calling her friends saying, hey, I'm not selling any today. Get your butt down here. I need to sell some goods. Okay, so the first is areas of governance. A lot of countries, not only in Africa, but around the world, feel that they now have to put all the resources to make their countries democracies online so that anybody can access information about the government and what it's doing at a web interface. There are major initiatives in Africa throughout the country to do the same thing. It requires an immense amount of money, labor, and infrastructure, and it takes time. And African countries are only beginning to do that. But then we have these concepts that emerge. Instead of just, we live in a democracy, we live in an e-democracy, an electronic democracy, where allegedly everything that you need to be an informed citizen to participate in your society is available at your fingertips at the website. There are all kinds of conferences organized in Africa to encourage African countries to move their governments online, to democratize them. There's this assumption that if it's online, it's going to be democratized. Books are coming out, e-governance in Africa. So there's a whole area. Another thing I want to point out in terms of governance is that some of you may be aware that there is quite a bit of political corruption, not only in our country, but also in, among African countries. And in Kenya in 2009, during the elections, what happened was there was a lot of political violence at the polling stations. And so an activist organization called Ushahidi created a website, and here you see the interface. And what people could do is use their cell phones, and if they saw people being beaten, threatened, intimidated, harassed at any polling station, they immediately pushed a few buttons on their phone, sent that information to the centralized website, and then reported it so that police could respond, and other voters could elect to stay away from that station and try to submit their votes elsewhere. This has become a very famous model now. Ushahidi, you look at their website, and they're not only developing this and testing it out in other countries where just the act of voting is a very delicate political gesture in some cases, but another example of how these technologies are used in Africa to support governance. Finance is another area. Quick example, in Kenya in 2007, a service called M-Pesa was created, which allowed people to use their mobile phones to do their everyday banking. Today, this might seem like, oh, who cares for us? But remember, you don't have a Wells Fargo, a First Interstate that you can walk through down the street or drive to. There's no banks around, nothing. You know, like out in the rural areas, what do you do with your money? You just basically, you know, hide it under a rock or something. So having access to banking has really changed things for people, and they've used mobile phones to facilitate that process. I actually have a grad student who's working right now on this issue, but not in Africa. He's looking at Mexican immigrants in the United States and across Mexico, and how they're using mobile phones to send money to support their families back and forth across borders. Education, you may have heard of the One Laptop Per Child initiative that was started at MIT. There are 500,000 of these laptops in use by kids in Africa. So they use these little XO machines, and it's a $100 machine. It's making a big difference in some schools, But let me tell you, it's a very small scale, micro, limited initiative. When you see the kind of need that exists up close, you realize we could use 100,000 such projects. There's just incredible need. But this is teaching kids in Africa at a very young age how to use these interfaces and intuitively engage with them. This is, if you go on their website, you can see that these little dots, probably not able to see them, but little blue dots on here indicate all the places in the world where the $100 laptop is in use. And a more topical example is in healthcare. This is a slide that I just captured yesterday, and it shows you that in Liberia right now, UNICEF is working with the Liberian government to use SMS and text messaging to inform citizens about the Ebola virus. And if they have certain symptoms, they need to get to a medical practitioner immediately so that they can try to help minimize the spread of the virus in Liberia. So mobile phones, ICTs, are also being used in that sector as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some challenges and barriers to ICT integration. And again, this deserves its own whole lecture, but I just want to highlight a few issues here. Some of these challenges and barriers is that when you go to Africa, if you go to South Africa, you see a very modernized, completely high-tech society. But if you go up a couple countries to Zambia, rural Zambia, where I've been working, lots of underdeveloped areas, which we'll get to that later, but it might be just fine that places stay underdeveloped. They don't necessarily have to develop. But throughout the region, there's a real lack of economic resources. In the area where I'm working, people make less than $1 a day. Can you imagine if you had to live and try to use a mobile phone and or a computer when you are making less than $365 a year? It's just to put it in those terms. The priority for people that live in conditions of grave poverty and underdevelopment might not be, I got to get online. I got to get the next killer app. It might be, we need better water. So how to balance this imperative of get everybody in the world online, which is the kind of driving logic from the Western industrialized part of the world, even in a humanitarian form. They think it's good for everybody. But I think it's important to listen to people on the ground and really hear their voices and try to figure out what their needs are, what their dreams are, what they really want, instead of just pushing stuff on them. So lack of economic resources. Political leadership and governance is a real issue. In order to have an e-democracy, put your whole society and governmental system online, you need to have leadership. You need to have a leader that knows why that's happening and why it's useful. And a lot of politics in Africa is just extremely varied. And there is a lot of corruption among political leaders in Africa as well. There are infrastructure and energy challenges. As you brought up earlier, the landline telephone infrastructure doesn't exist everywhere. Neither does the electrical grid. So you can't have internet if you don't have power, unless you're going to put in solar or wind. And that's what people are doing in some areas. And then there are grave literacy challenges to implementing these technologies. We can't just assume that everybody in the world should be able to speak and read English. But the internet privileges the globalization of the English language and sort of says, if you want to be digitally literate, then you need to be able to know English. In some countries, there are big drives to put indigenous languages online. And even within Native American communities, there are initiatives to digitize the sound of uttered native languages, which could be lost if we just create an internet in which English is the main trafficked language of currency. Okay? So thinking about these literacy challenges, Has anybody, how many people know different languages? A few. Has anybody ever been in a situation where you're in a room and people are talking and you're the only one that doesn't understand? If you haven't been in that situation, try to get in it. You learn a lot. You really learn a lot by being in a situation or a milieu when you're the only one that doesn't understand what's being spoken and said. And you realize the privilege of being able to understand a language. And then you have to imagine what it would be like to not understand that language, especially if it's a language where it seems like powerful people use it and somehow you don't have access to it. So language, in some sense, is totally interwoven with issues of power and access to opportunities. So there's a politics there. And then finally, the gender issues. There's a huge, not only digital divide in Africa, there's a gendered digital divide. Women have much less access to digital technologies in Africa, and I'll get into that more, some of the reasons why, maybe more in a minute. Okay, I think I'm going to move into, so just to get into I want to put up a few more quotes before I get into the final section of the lecture. This is a quote from an article two articles that I sometimes assign to students when I'm talking about these things. But the first one says, mobile telephony may contribute, instead of just thinking of it as a really good thing, these scholars say, mobile telephony may actually contribute to widening the gap between the poor and the poorest, leading to what Manuel Castells has defined as the fourth world, a non-consuming, non-producing, marginalized group, which is structurally irrelevant to the current structure of the global economy. So what this means is, like, if you don't have mobile phone, you kind of get written out of world history, in the sense that there's this imagination that your presence isn't registering and integrated with this whole set of broader exchange and communication that's happening. Okay? The second quote says, by not adopting ICTs, people, quote, run the risk of being left out of the new information-based global economy. So it's important then to think about what's at stake politically, socially, economically, and even culturally in gaining access to these technologies. If you gain access to them, it could be costly. You have to prioritize it. If you don't, then where are you in the broader global scheme of things, you know? And so those are some of the issues that we're trying to balance in thinking through the research that we're doing. And I would say, just add to that, that rural communities are especially vulnerable within these sets of issues and conditions, that they often just, I mean, it's kind of great to be in a rural community because you get to do what you want. You can kind of go under the radar. A lot of libertarians like to live in rural communities because they see it as an oasis of freedom, as a place where the state is not going to intervene and regularly monitor and control to the same extent that it might in an urban environment. But at the same time, the resources in those communities, the educational systems, the feeling of belonging and integration can often be fraught with conflict and challenges. So, all right. I'm going to get into the third section, which will be more of the case study and more of the detail of what we did. So here's a map of Africa. Here's Zambia, circled. It's down here. All right, and then here's another map which shows you Zambia. This is Zambia, and we were working here in the southern province, right around here where that little mobile phone popped up, but it's right around here, okay? And it's a village called Macha. We went there, I took grad students there in 2012 and 2013 to work with local people in the community to try to, my part of the research was to interview people in the community, as many people as we could, do videotaped interviews, and find out what they think about ICTs, whether they want them, if they want them, how would they like to be able to use them? And then my team would share that part of the project with computer scientists who are also on our team, who are going to try to develop technical solutions for this community in dialogue with people in the community. And we had been invited into the community through a research collaboration with my computer science partner and her connections with people in this community. So what we did is we had, these are some of the people. I always try to mention the people's names because I see this very much as a collaborative research project. It's not my project, it's our project. I'm speaking on behalf of all of those who contributed, and we worked with people locally. These were key partners for us in our first year there, what we did was we conducted more than 200 videotaped interviews, and we also turned this into an educational project where we donated these little video cameras to the community that are called flip cams. They're kind of like cell phone cams. And we taught people in the community how to use these cameras and then how to edit the material. And then we also asked them to translate the material. So while we were investigating the community's response to ICTs, we also felt it was important to do an exchange pedagogically. So we would teach them a skill. If these machines are going to be used in the community, we want them to be able to use them to tell their own stories in their own languages, in their own voices, and then if they select, upload that on the internet and exchange it however they want. So I can't show you any of the video today because that's their property, and there's restrictions on what I can do with that as a researcher. I can show you all these still photos that I'm going to show you. So we have 200 videos, we've got so many hours, and now it's a matter of going through all that material. We had to translate a lot of it because English is the second language there. Tonga is the first language. Chitonga is how they say it. And so we had to translate some of it into English so that we as researchers from the US could understand it. And then our goal, it's a work in progress still, so we're still going through all this material and then trying to pull out themes that we see, patterns. We share that information with the computer scientists so that hopefully they can develop technical solutions that have been adapted to the voices of people and the experiences and needs of people in the community. So that's the kind of idealized version. Now, that's our intention. There are a lot of challenges along the way. And if you want to hear the real stories of I'm telling you real stories, but if you want to hear the kind of real difficult challenges, we'll sit down with a beer and I'll tell you, okay? So in this section, and I know I don't have a lot of time left, but I'm going to just go through some general conditions in matcha. Then I'm going to give you some quotes and give you a sense of how ICTs are thought about within those conditions. And then a little bit of more information about women in their situation in matcha. Okay? So conditions in matcha. This is what it looks like to fly in. It would take about 7-8 hours on a bus from Lusaka. The nearest grocery store to matcha is 70 kilometers away. So it's out in an area. In order to get there, we had to fly in a tiny little Cessna that is used by the hospital staff that are in matcha. So it's a pretty remote, environment, not a lot of resources there. People live in conditions like this. This is a Tonga people who live in homesteads that they make themselves with thatch roofs. No electricity in them, no running water. If they're lucky, they might have built a latrine, but sanitation is also a big concern among the chief of the community because that's how disease spreads, in his words. And so his main priority is not to get people using ICTs, but to build latrines. He says he sees that as the first step, and then we'll talk about computing. But that's an example of how people live. At the same time, this is a British colony. The Brethren, and also a place that's targeted by lots of Christian missionaries, okay? Brethren Church of Christ set up a mission in the 19th century. This is their church. the center part of Matcha is extremely Christian, BCC, Brethren Church in Christ, which is very conservative moral values. And the mission also runs a hospital, okay? So you have a hospital that serves a vital function regionally. They have done a huge amount of HIV/AIDS treatment at this hospital. Many people in this area live today with HIV/AIDS. It still spreads in this area, but many people survive because of medicine that's administered from this hospital. All of these issues could go deeper here, but I'm going to get through this quickly. This is a shot inside one of the schools. We visited 8 schools in the area and interviewed teachers at all of those schools, talked to students at all of those schools. And this is a private school. This is one funded by the BCC, the Brethren Church in Christ. They have books that they share and reuse. They don't have electricity, they don't have running water at the school. So imagine sending your kid to school and not knowing if they'd be able to drink water. Another thing I want to tell you is that little kids, 5, 6 years old, even up to, they walk one way, they might walk 2 to 3 hours to school. So they have to get up at like 4 in the morning, walk 3 hours to get to school by 7 or 7:30. By the time they've gotten hardly any sleep, they arrive at school and they're so tired they can't pay attention. And then they get done with school at 2 or 3 in the afternoon and have to walk back 3 hours, and they walk by themselves, So the whole education system is just very different than what we might ever imagine. Just getting there is a challenge. Once you get there, the schools are, this doesn't show it in this picture, but they're very overcrowded and underfunded. And they need all kinds of resources. So there are schools. There's also limited marketplaces. This is one of the, it's called Sky Blue General. And they stay open and sell basic goods like laundry detergent, soap, shampoo. It's all brought in from Lusaka or the nearby town. And then there's an open marketplace where they sell used clothing that comes in from the West as donated goods. People intercept it, and then they sell it to make a livelihood. There's also things at the market like a barber shop, an outlet where you can charge your mobile phone for a fee. Car batteries set up to charge other kinds of electronics if you want to charge them up. As I said, income is $1 a day. A bus ride to the city to get like major groceries if you needed them, any perishables for example, $5 per ride. And then the internet, when it was on in Matcha, cost $30 per month. Okay? So if you look at these numbers, yeah, the economy just is not, the scale of it is a little off, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense. We did this is Chief Matcha. In addition to there being a mission, which has a huge amount of power and influence in Matcha, there is a traditional tribal chief who administers his chiefdom. This is Chief Matcha. He was very generous and invited us to his palace. And we did an interview with him for 2 hours. He also gave us a tour around the whole grounds, and he said, I wish you all the best in doing this project, but I really hope that you connect with the people in the community and listen to them and pay attention to what they want. Don't come here to serve your research agenda. Come here because you genuinely want to help and not just abandon people, but do something. And they have what they call, I don't know, like researcher fatigue, where they're used to people coming into the community because there's a hospital there. They come in and they say, oh, we want to do this, this, and this is going to help you. And then they leave and never come back. So also doing research in that kind of a fraught environment can be challenging. How do you gain people's trust? How do you get them to talk to you? Okay, so how are ICTs thought about and used by Machans? I'm just going to read you a few comments to give you a sense, and you won't be able to see this because it's too small. But one person said, if we had key centers where internet would be accessible, where people know that it is cheaper, fair, and the environment conducive and friendly, I think that would be the best thing. Another said, The internet has made communication much easier. Just in the twinkling of an eye, in a second, you can communicate with your neighbor, you can communicate with a friend at home. In those days, way back, like people used to communicate with maybe like smoke, drums, and then communication changed to the post office. Now you don't write a letter unless maybe for a job application or maybe for school. Then somebody says, with the current situation, you can't do without the internet, and if you're really aiming high in life, you just have to get on it. I'll just read you one more from Chief Macha since we're kind of short on time. He says, Chief Macha said, any technology can be very useful, but it can be misused. That's why one must be very careful. These phones that we use are very, very useful, actually, very, very useful, but they can be very destructive, and I could misuse this to kill you. I could misuse this to do anything stupid. So it's a question of how you use the device. The idea is good, you communicate easily, but in your communication, you must communicate very, very well. So, you know, we're kind of going through these comments from people. We've got, you can imagine, a huge amount from all these video interviews and trying to like listen to these voices and make sense and interpret. The internet did come in to Matcha from a Dutch-funded initiative from 2009 to 2012, okay? What happened was they set up about 6 of these they're called LinkNet stations. These are VSAT terminals where you have, sometimes they use solar power and they use a satellite direct connection to the internet, and they have little terminals set up, okay? That's the $30 a month fee though. To use it, you had to pay $30 a month, and only a tiny sliver. There's 150,000 people in Matcha around the whole community, okay? Only 300 were able to afford to regularly use the internet during that time because it was so costly, okay? So they have inside little terminals where you can access the internet, and some people did like save money so they could do it, or they do it collectively, and they'd say, let's save up and share access and share time and trade off our position. This was a school, information technology school that they formed during that time, and some people did what was called the ICDL, the International Computer Driver's License course, which teaches you the basics like Microsoft Word, Excel, you know, those kind of PowerPoint. Another situation, you got a lot of people who then know that the Dutch are starting this initiative in Matcha. So there's an NGO called Computer Aid International. They said, oh good, you're going to need a bunch of old computers. They basically filled up a whole cargo container of computers, shipped them there, and then they sat in these storage rooms just unused. There wasn't enough electricity in the community to use them, and they didn't have software on them. And they didn't have people in the community who knew how to do all the software installations. So they just sat there, a lot of them unused. Not only that, they kept them outside, got infested with termites. They have a very particular type of termite there and rats. And so what they had to do is incinerate the thing, which creates toxic exposure to these chemicals and parts that are burning in their environment. So what I'm trying to get at in emphasizing this is it's not easy. These are some of the challenges and barriers. It's not like you just take a computer, plug it in, turn it on, everything's great. I would have never known this ever in my life had I not actually gone to the place, walked around it, talked to the people, got inside the buildings, figured out what the lay of the land is with respect to ICT use, okay? Lots of people in Matcha. These are photos. I shot most of all of these photos because it's part of my research method. I interview people, but I also shoot photography, shoot video. They're on their cell phones. Cell phones are, you can see them all over. And since a lot of them cannot afford talk time, like you have to buy minutes because they don't have prepaid subscriptions, they use the phone as a receiver technology, not just an interactive, let me call you. Many women especially don't have money to buy talk time. So they basically receive text messages and phone calls. They don't call out. And then when they receive calls, they often gather around and talk collectively. Not all the time. You can't see that here because they do individuals as well. But they talk collectively. That's an efficient way of everybody participating in the conversation and exchange. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. This is the last section because I know we're getting close to being done. Women in ICTs. So within these conditions, what's it like for women in Matcha? Well, outside the hospital, there are these fire camps. Women come from around the area to prepare shimi. It's food for their people who are in the hospital. The hospital has no kitchen service. So in order for the people who are giving birth, who are in with HIV, who may have tuberculosis, any number of diseases, in order for them to eat when they're in the hospital, they have to have loved ones who come and cook for them. We partnered with this man who used to work up in the north in the copper mines, who speaks very good English and Tonga. And we met with him, Sabala Natbeni, and he became our translator, because most of these women do not speak English. We went around the fire camps day after day and interviewed many of these women and talked to them. We wanted to know, what do you think about ICTs, mobile phones or internet? The first thing was, I've never heard of the internet. Most women that we spoke with that were from the more rural areas coming in never heard of the internet. Not only had they never heard of it, they showed a patent disinterest in it, indifference. And I took that seriously as something, for me, that was a real wake-up call. Why should we expect everybody in the world to want to be on and use the internet? I think we need to keep that question active and not just assume that it's good and enhancing for everyone. It might be, but it isn't necessarily. So talking to these women and listening to them say, yes, I use a mobile phone, but I've never heard of the internet, I don't want to use it, it's not of interest to me, it's not relevant to my life, was a very eye-opening experience. And it wasn't just a few of them. I mean, a few had heard of it, but most of them hadn't, and they were not interested. So it's a question of, like, what are the ethics here? Whose decision is it? On whose terms do we decide whether to introduce a technology like this? It should be their decision, in my opinion. But at the same time, there may be structural conditions that position them to not know that that opportunity exists. So that's why having conversations like this might be very helpful. But the women were very forthcoming, wanted to talk to us. In addition to so then the question became, how is it that most women we spoke to did not know about the internet? One reason we thought of, again, was at the schools. The schools are overcrowded, they're under-resourced. And so there's, you go to, this is one school where, the kids were so friendly and great, and they were just like, give us pencils, we don't need internet and computer, we need some pencils and paper. There's one computer lab in a school, it's empty. They don't have electricity to power it. They can't pay the electricity bill, it's too expensive, and the electricity is inconsistent. It surges, it destroys the computers if they turn it on. So we found empty classrooms like this not used. So even if the girls were going to school, they were in a school where they wouldn't be able to use this. A lot of young women in this area are also just socialized to have children, right, in their teen years. And I met a lot of, very young mothers who that's their sort of historical practice and their traditional culture. And, so their priority is around their daily labor and routine of retrieving water for the family from the community pumps, carrying firewood, and then in this case this woman is training a new generation to carry the firewood so that they can stay warm in the cool evenings, preparing shimi and food for the family. And I don't know if you can see, but this labor is done in conjunction with, there's a cell phone there and there's a cell phone there. So they are communicating with mobile phone while they're doing this labor, but the internet and computing for them is just sort of a thing that doesn't really apply, and they feel they don't really need. Again, you know, the Machin women were among the strongest women I've ever met. I don't know how they managed to carry water like this. I mean, this is done in lots of parts of the world, but they have a great sort of teamwork to be able to get these huge filled things of water on their heads and walk like so effortlessly. I couldn't believe it. Okay, finally, I do want to talk a little bit about gender-based violence. This is one of 3 police officers in the community. It's 150,000 people, 3 police officers. The police station is about from that to here, and the jail is probably from here to there, okay? She's one of the officers who's worked in the community for 8 years. And she did a long interview with us, and she said, I asked her, what's the biggest issue faced by your community? Gender-based violence is the biggest issue. She said more than half of the women that live in Macha are victims of gender-based violence, whether it's rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, murder. She said that it's a huge problem. I don't know if you can see up here, but there's all kinds of signs that she had around her in her office. One of them is that in order for an assault to be deemed legitimate, it has to be certified by a medical doctor. The medical doctors, I mean, there's a whole kind of political culture there where sometimes medical doctors might be a family member of someone who perpetrated an assault. So just getting a certificate that an assault exists in a culture where there's a lot of corruption and informal political dealings is really tricky. So she said that, and even while we were there, 4 girls were raped by a high school teacher in the school. So, you know, to report a gender-based crime, in some cases the girl or woman, after being beaten, raped, or assaulted, would have to walk 10 miles to this station in order for that incident to be deemed legitimate and part of an official record. So when we're talking about communication infrastructure, we often think, you know, and let's think about WYCA. If we're aware of a rape, domestic abuse situation, we immediately think, pick up the phone. Imagine if you don't have talk time on your phone to make a phone call after you've been brutally beaten. Imagine if you're out in an area that's so remote and you're injured. You can't walk to the police station to seek help. There are also local cultural practices and hierarchies that sometimes, as we know from our culture, banish, blame the victim, further marginalize the victim, and fail to provide assistance when it's desperately needed. So my conversation with this police officer happened at the very end of our research visit, and it made me really acutely aware that when we go back, I want to dig deeper into this particular issue and see how, with our project, we can help and provide further support in this issue. Because I feel like my conversation with her just opened up a huge array of need, and if these technologies are going to be useful, I would hope that one of the main uses would be to support women and not to further disenfranchise or marginalize them. I'm sorry to sort of do short shrift on that, but there's so much there to dig deeper into. After we had those conversations, members of our group met, and what we've been doing over the past year is providing more detail to the computer scientists that we work with. I work on the social side of the project, the issues that deal with the social and cultural and economic understanding. But while we were there, and these are the last slides that I'll show, we did implement a prototype of a free cell phone service, and I would love to make this free cell phone service available to victims of gender-based violence in the community and just like pilot it as that. So we climbed up. I did not climb. I took pictures of my students climbing up on the community water tower, which has the highest point in the area. And we piloted a cell phone project that's free that uses the white space part of the electromagnetic spectrum, which was opened up with the transition to digital TV. It's a long thing we don't need to go into. But it opened up a part of the bandwidth that's accessible for experimental use. And so our project called Village Cell uses that part of the spectrum. We partnered with locals to do these installations and tests. And the overall solution is to kind of create just a really low-tech but very effective cell phone system in a box. To put that up and make it available in areas that are not covered currently by commercial mobile phone providers, and that could be used for, especially for emergency communication purposes. That's one thing we did. And the last thing I just wanted to mention, in case you're interested, our project, another spin-off of it, was when we were there, we realized kids couldn't read at night, even if they had homework, because they couldn't afford candles to light up in their homes. And at UC Santa Barbara, where I teach, there's an Institute for Energy Efficiency that had created a solar-powered light. And they created a nonprofit. You can go to the website. It's called unitetolight.org. And now they send these solar power lights all over the world in areas that don't have electricity, but they may need illumination at night, either for reading, for women that are cooking or doing nighttime labor in the home. So we did a fundraising campaign using CrowdRise. It's you can use that to fundraise for a project, and my grad student helped organize it so that we sent, I think, 300 or 400 lights to Matcha with the money that we raised online. And then these are some of the pictures that they sent to us of the kids using the lights to read at night. So our work is still in progress. We have some of the publications here, and you know, the project I didn't mention, but it is funded. This research is a 4-year project funded by the National Science Foundation. And what we hope is that what we learn in Matcha, Zambia, in this rural community that has limited economic and energy resources, that we'll be able to develop technical solutions and also academic knowledge that can be used to think even about Native American reservations and low-income rural areas in the United States. I don't know if you guys have had any talks about that, but I would love to come to a lecture on ICTs, you know, on Indian reservations in Montana or throughout the West, because I think that's a key issue. And actually, in my future, I hope that I can continue this kind of work and work in the United States on reservation lands with Native and Indigenous peoples of this country. So thank you very much for your attention. And I know we're getting to the end of time, but if anyone wants to talk afterwards, I'd be glad to answer questions or talk with you one-on-one later, whatever you'd like. But thank you for being such a generous, captive audience.